new study done by Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights in the Bay Area looks specifically at transit-related fines and how they're disproportionately targeted toward those in a lower socioeconomic status, specifically minorities. Now, we're not supposed to have things like debtors prison in this country, but in some regard we do, because if you owe any money to the government in the form of a citation or a traffic violation, well, you got to pay it. If you don't pay it, they'll continue increasing the penalties, and then eventually they'll throw you in jail if you're unable to pay. Now, if you're poor and you're unable to pay, it puts you at a huge disadvantage. Now, in San Francisco, black people make up less than 6% of the city's population, yet account for 49% of arrests made for failure to pay a fine or appear in court.
Let's pause there, because that's such an important number. So some folks who are either racist or just ignorant, right? And I know ignorance sounds bad, but hear me out on it. Here's what I'm saying, right? Like, if you don't know all the facts of how these things go down, you might think like, oh, well, like black people don't show up as much as white people. See, they're irresponsible. No, they get arrested more. So that's point number one, right? So number two, and by the way, that all the studies bear that out. I've said this many times, but it bears repeating in a story like this, that whites and blacks smoke marijuana at the same rate, but blacks get arrested 4 times as much as white people do. So they get arrested more. Second of all, because of the socioeconomic situation of blacks in this country, that more of them happen to have less money. Okay, that's just the reality. Born with a lot less wealth, especially after the 2008 crash. The average black person, I think, is born into a family with a little over 11,000 or 13,000 in wealth. I forget the exact number now, but it was stunningly low. An average white person is born into a family with, I think, about $150,000 in wealth. So the disparity is gigantic. So in a situation like that, well, they're less able to afford it when they are arrested disproportionately.
Right.
So by the end of the process, the reason you might not show up is because you don't have the money.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, that might be one of the reasons why you don't show up. But oftentimes they do show up and they try to explain to the judge that they're willing to do community service, which, by the way, is supposed to be an option to people who don't have, you know, the money available to pay these citations. And oftentimes judges don't allow them to do the community service. I was an example of that. Okay. Early days of TYT, I got a ticket for speeding. It was totally my fault. I deserved it. Tried to explain to the judge, hey, I'm willing to do community service, but it's tough to pay this. And he's like, I don't care. You shouldn't have gotten the ticket. That was his response. And so a lot of people deal with that. Now, I dealt with that as an innocent-looking white person according to society standards, right? Imagine if you're looked upon as any type of threat, or if you're looked upon as a throwaway in society, which a lot of these people are. A lot of these people are homeless, right? So if they're homeless, why are you giving them tickets if you know they're not going to be able to pay it?
It's just pointless, right? And it goes round and round. One of the guys is blind, that they use as an example. And the judge so doesn't believe anything anybody says that he's like, oh, nice acting job. So once you're in that hole, it's so hard to get out. So, for example, you get a $220 ticket, as one guy did, this guy Mayo, a $221 ticket.
Who was homeless, by the way.
Right. And then if you go to contest it as he did, he showed up, goes to contest it, he loses. They go, okay, now give me the $221. He's like, I don't have it. I'm homeless. I don't have the $221. They're like, okay, since you don't have it right now, it's another $300 fine. So now all of a sudden you owe $521. Okay, the only thing he has is an $800 check he gets for a disability, right? So that would take away the great majority of his money for the whole month. For the whole month.
And it becomes a vicious cycle, because if you are poor and you get a ticket and you're unable to pay it, oftentimes whatever municipality you're from will take your driver's license away. And once they do that, all of a sudden you're at a greater disadvantage when it comes to applying for jobs and finding work. You need a way of getting around. Now look, this study was specifically done in the Bay Area, and they focused on California. And in California, there's a huge issue with public transportation, especially areas like Los Angeles, right? So if you're living in LA, for instance, and you're extremely poor and you got one of these citations that you can't pay and they take your driver's license away, you're done. You're done. It's almost impossible for you to find work.
So now you can't find work, which means that you can't pay the bill, and the bills are continuing to mount up. And by the way, if you owe the government, at some point they can arrest you and put you in jail, and we're back in debtors' prisons. So this is the hole that they put everybody in. Now, there's California's not alone. So right now, Jerry Brown, at least the governor of California, is trying to fix it a little bit.
Yeah, let me give you his quote.
Okay,
Graphic number
and then
7.
I'll tell you about the rest of the country.
So Governor Jerry Brown last year described the debt trap created by the state's traffic fine system as a hellhole of desperation. So he came up with what he considered a solution, allowing people who are from a lower socioeconomic status to pay 50 to 80% of the citation. Which, by the way, I mean, I guess that's a little bit of a compromise, but not really. If you're homeless and you can't pay, you can't pay. There needs to be other options.
Yeah, and we're not saying, hey, break any law you like or don't pay any fines and stuff, but let's find a reasonable way that we can all agree on. So real community service, right? Whatever you think that is. Okay, there's got to be another option because it's not helping any of us to throw these people in jail, right? Or to keep chasing them around and wasting government resources. Trying to get them to pay is going to cost more than $800, right? All the man hours that the cops are going to put into it, let alone the court system. It's so inefficient. It's so wasteful. And then finally, look, all across the country, and the FBI, the Justice Department, I should say, when they looked into it in Ferguson, found out that this is a way of redistributing taxes so that, well, we cut taxes on the rich, so we don't have enough revenue to run our local government, whether it's a municipality or it's a state. So what are we going to do? Let's pick on the most powerless people because they won't be able to complain and they won't be able to buy off the politicians. So we'll just fine them more.
Yep.
So in St. Louis and in many other parts of the country as well, they started increasing the fines, knick-knack fines that in the past they didn't enforce, but they enforce it for the specific purpose of raising more revenue. But they took it from the poorest people there is. They give to the richest and they take from the poorest. And then some of them can pay, great, they've got more revenue, but it killed them to pay that amount, right? And by the way, that's taking money out of the economy that they almost certainly would have spent on food and other necessities, right? Whereas if you tax the rich, that's money that they normally would have saved and not necessarily spent back into the economy.
Exactly.
I mean, it is perverse on every level, let alone the racism and the systemic discrimination against the poor and the middle class in this country, no matter what their race is.
Yeah, and by the way, that kind of tax is referred to as a regressive tax. So when you hear the word regressive, that's the appropriate definition, right?
Yes.
When you're attacking or targeting the poor to make up for the lost revenue because you've given the wealthy such huge tax breaks.